As women move gracefully beyond the age of 60, a fascinating, often unspoken transformation begins to unfold, one that the world rarely acknowledges and that many women themselves struggle to fully articulate, even to their closest confidants. Because in a society that often treats aging as an endpoint to desire, femininity, and romantic intrigue, the rich inner lives of older women remain mostly hidden behind smiles, politeness, or silence, while inside, a complex landscape of emotion, memory, longing, and unfulfilled fantasy continues to thrive. And the truth is, older women, whether widowed, divorced, partnered, or single, do not simply stop imagining, craving, or dreaming about deep emotional connection, passionate encounters, or moments of spontaneous intimacy just because the mirror reflects a few more lines or the body moves a little more slowly. In fact, for many, this stage of life brings with it a surprising emotional and sensual awakening, a quiet reemergence of desires that were buried under years of caretaking, societal judgment, responsibilities, or a lack of permission to place their own pleasure and emotional needs first. And while it may be difficult for some to say out loud, these fantasies often bloom not from loneliness, but from a renewed understanding of the self, because with age comes a deeper emotional intelligence, a clearer sense of what they truly want, and a growing intolerance for superficial connection, which means that what older women secretly fantasize about is rarely what media might portray as raunchy or fleeting, but rather something layered, intentional, emotionally safe, and electrifying in its ability to awaken parts of themselves long forgotten. And perhaps one of the most common fantasies involves being truly seen. Seen not just for the surface of who they are, but for the stories etched into their smile lines, for the wisdom that radiates from their gaze, and for the fire that still burns quietly beneath the skin. And they may. Imagine a moment where someone takes the time to listen, not just to their words, but to their silences, to their energy, to the subtle signals that say, I still want to be desired, to be touched, to be chosen. And in those moments, the fantasy isn't about a specific person or even a specific act. It's about being the center of attention again, about being adored without needing to prove or perform, about being touched with care and curiosity instead of rushed routine. And sometimes it's about reliving the rush of a first kiss or the nervous joy of someone reaching across the table just to hold their hand, or the intensity of eye contact that says everything without speaking a word. Because for many women over 60, the emotional and sensory connection becomes more powerful than the purely physical. And yet the body still responds, still yearns, still tingles at the idea of someone pressing their lips to the nape of their neck or tracing the lines of their collarbone with gentle fingertips. And these aren't just idle thoughts or leftover daydreams from youth. They are current, vivid, and often growing stronger with time. And another deeply held fantasy among older women is the experience of being pursued, not aggressively or with drama, but with quiet confidence, steady admiration, and the kind of effort that says, you are still worth the chase. And they might imagine a partner planning something special without being asked, initiating a touch just because, or whispering compliments that go beyond appearance and speak directly to their essence. Because after decades of pouring into others, raising children, managing homes, supporting spouses, many women over 60 crave a reversal, a moment where they get to receive without guilt, where they get to be the one whose needs come first. And this fantasy often includes emotional safety, where they don't have to explain or minimize their desires, where their aging body isn't seen as a limitation, but as a canvas of experience and strength. And there's often a secret wish to explore sensuality with new eyes, without the scripts of their younger years, without shame, and without comparison, which can lead to fantasies about slow, mindful intimacy, about partners who understand that arousal after 60 may not be automatic, but is no less real. And in fact, it often runs deeper, more rooted in connection and trust. And then there are the fantasies that are playful, adventurous, or even mischievous. Not because they want to relive youth, but because they finally feel free to explore what they couldn't when younger due to shame, fear, or societal pressure. And these might include spontaneous moments, dancing barefoot in the kitchen at midnight, skinny dipping under the moonlight, or laughing uncontrollably in the middle of making love. Not because it's perfect or scripted, but because it's real, and it's theirs. And it's a kind of intimacy that celebrates the entirety of who they are now. And still, many women carry fantasies about being emotionally claimed, about someone who says, "I choose you," not despite their age, but because of it, because there's something magnetic about a woman who knows who she is, who owns her space, who brings not just a body but a soul to the table. And when someone looks at her with full attention and presence, it can feel like electricity, like water after a long drought, like being remembered in a world that so often forgets to see beyond youth. And so these fantasies continue to live quietly in the background of busy lives, in the pauses between caregiving, in the silences of an empty home, or even the quiet intimacy of a long-term partnership that has lost its edge, and they're not shameful, selfish, or irrelevant. No, they're sacred. They're proof that passion does not retire, that desire is not tied to a number, and that older women, in all their complexity and grace, still want to feel wanted, still want to be held, still want to be awakened. And what makes these fantasies even more powerful is not just their emotional depth, but the way they often carry a sense of healing, as if they're quietly repairing the parts of a woman's soul that have been overlooked, dismissed, or undernourished for years. Because beyond the desire for connection or pleasure lies an even deeper yearning to be seen, known, and loved without conditions or expiration dates. And many older women fantasize about the kind of presence that allows them to completely let go, to be vulnerable without fear of judgment, to feel beautiful not because of smooth skin or a tight waistline, but because of the wisdom in their eyes, the confidence in their laughter, and the unapologetic way they own every wrinkle, curve, and freckle as a story of survival, of love, of living fully. And they may imagine conversations that are slow and unrushed, where someone looks into their eyes and asks, "What do you want?" and actually waits for the answer, not out of politeness, but because they truly care to know. And for women who have spent decades suppressing their own desires in favor of others, children, spouses, employers, aging parents, the fantasy of simply being asked what would bring them joy can be revolutionary. And this often spills into dreams of being nurtured, of having their hair brushed slowly, of lying in bed while someone traces their shoulder blades, not with urgency, but with reverence, as if discovering a sacred landscape that deserves time, care, and admiration. And for many, these imagined moments of softness contrast the noise of earlier life chapters, when love was often transactional, sex hurried, affection tied to obligation. And in these fantasies, they are free to feel, to ask, to explore, and even to be worshipped in a way that says, "You matter. You're not invisible." Because invisibility is one of the most painful parts of aging, not just socially, but intimately. And older women often report a shift around midlife where the gaze that once lingered begins to pass over them, where compliments fade, where conversations become more about practicality than connection. And so they begin to quietly build their own internal landscapes of fantasy, places where they are the focus again, not because they crave attention in a shallow sense, but because attention is a form of recognition, a mirror that says, "I see you, all of you, and I want you just as you are." And some of the most potent fantasies involve a partner who recognizes not just their sensuality, but their power, who sees their softness not as fragility, but as strength, who is turned on not just by physical appearance, but by the fullness of her being, her stories, her resilience, her emotional depth. And in this fantasy, there is no need to explain or perform. There is no insecurity about stretch marks or the slowing down of arousal, because the connection is so strong, so emotionally present, that pleasure arises naturally from trust, from comfort, from the sacred familiarity of someone who makes them feel safe enough to open. And they might imagine a scene where intimacy begins not with physical touch, but with a slow, intentional glance, with shared laughter, with a hand resting on the small of their back as they wash dishes or tend to the garden, with a love note left by the bed, with a quiet moment under the stars where nothing needs to be said. And from there, the fantasy unfolds. Not in a dramatic way, but with a slow burn, with long pauses, deep breaths, and gentle exploration. And for many women, the idea of sensual touch without a rush toward intercourse becomes its own fantasy, because it's in the lingering where they feel most alive, most treasured, and most awakened. And in their minds, the perfect moment might be a Sunday morning where the world is still, the sunlight is soft, and someone reaches for them not out of habit, but out of sincere desire, not trying to change them, fix them, or ignite something new, but to savor what already exists. And this fantasy often runs parallel to a yearning for a partner who listens, not just with ears, but with their body, who understands that every woman's rhythm changes over time, and that adapting to that rhythm is not a burden, but a privilege. And some older women quietly imagine being with someone much younger, not out of vanity or conquest, but because they believe a younger partner might still possess the curiosity, the eagerness to explore, the openness to learn, without the hardened edges that long relationships or aging sometimes bring, while others fantasize about revisiting a past lover, not to relive old pain, but to rediscover the passion that once made them feel wild, powerful, and desired. And some even dream of secret affairs, not in betrayal, but in the freedom such a fantasy provides, the idea of being chosen again, pursued, and enveloped in a romance that feels alive with risk, mystery, and fire. And in all of these imagined worlds, one truth pulses quietly beneath the surface. That desire doesn't die. It only becomes more discerning, more deeply rooted in the emotional, the spiritual, the symbolic. And for older women, fantasy becomes not an escape from reality, but a quiet expression of what their souls crave most: emotional safety, sacred touch, and permission to still want, to still feel, to still be adored. And as we continue to explore this deeply personal and profoundly human realm of unspoken fantasy, it becomes even more evident that many older women do not necessarily crave youth itself, but rather the feeling that youth brought, the sense of possibility, the thrill of anticipation, the feeling of being pursued, not just for what they could give or do, but for the mysterious, magnetic essence of who they were and still are, even now, beneath years of caregiving, sacrifice, and roles that often ask them to put their needs second, third, or not at all. And in this quiet space of reflection, many older women imagine being with someone who sees beyond their age, someone who not only accepts the changes in their body, but cherishes them. Someone who touches their softer skin not as a flaw to be overlooked, but as a sacred texture that speaks of experience, of motherhood, of loss, of laughter, of storms weathered and joys hard-earned. And in this world of secret longing, they fantasize not about the explosive passion of teenage love, but the slow-burning intimacy that builds like a fire tended carefully over time, where each log placed, each flame encouraged, adds to the warmth and light of something enduring, something deeply safe, and it often begins in the most mundane moments. A glance across the room, a hand brushing theirs while reading a book, the soft sound of a voice calling their name with tenderness. And suddenly, the fantasy blooms from a seed of presence, because for so long many have felt invisible, as if their desires no longer mattered, as if they themselves had faded into the background of family, of community, of expectation. And these fantasies, whether quietly enjoyed before sleep or carried in their heart during long walks alone, are not about escaping reality, but about bringing color back to it, reminding them that their hearts are still open, their bodies still receptive, and their minds still alight with curiosity, with sensuality, with a desire to explore, to connect, to rediscover. And one particularly poignant fantasy many women share, though few dare to express, is the longing to be cared for without needing to ask, without having to earn it, to have someone offer them a massage, a hot cup of tea, a long conversation, not out of obligation, but out of devotion. And this devotion, in their inner world, translates into a kind of sacred romance. A return to a time when love was an unfolding mystery, not a checklist of tasks, and touch was a language of discovery, not routine. And some imagine going on a trip, somewhere quiet and far from their daily life, where they can let their guard down, take off their armor, and allow themselves to be the one who is pursued, who is held, who is awakened gently but completely. And it is not uncommon for fantasies to include the feeling of being adored, fully clothed, of being complimented for things they didn't even notice anymore. The way they tilt their head when they laugh, the light in their eyes when they speak of something they love, the way they move through a room with grace, even after decades of being told they were too much or not enough. And these fantasies are rarely about looks alone. They're about presence, reverence, emotional foreplay, the kind that starts with respect and ends in a kind of intimacy that is not explosive, but rather all-consuming in its tenderness. And while some women do carry fantasies that are more adventurous, playful, or sensual in a direct, physical way, such as being kissed on their inner wrist, being undressed slowly while someone speaks affirmations into their ear, or being touched with such intentional slowness that it brings tears not of pain, but of release. These moments are always wrapped in emotional security, because after a certain age, the most powerful aphrodisiac is not novelty, but safety, not wildness, but willingness. And in this internal theater of longing, many older women reclaim a version of themselves that society tried to bury: the sensual self, the daring self, the one who still wants to dance in candlelight, who still wants to be kissed under rain, who still dreams of someone asking, "What makes you feel alive?" and actually listening to the answer without rushing, without fixing, without judging. And for those who have been in long-term relationships, the fantasies often include their current partner, but in a new way, as if they've both stripped away years of expectation, hurt, and habit, and return to each other as curious lovers, not just companions, as explorers rather than managers of shared logistics. And in that fantasy, they rediscover the spark not by going back in time, but by choosing each other again, fully in the now, with open hearts and trembling hands. And even those who have chosen to remain single or are healing from past pain find that these fantasies are their private sanctuary, a space where they are allowed to hope, to want, to remember that their capacity to give and receive pleasure is not behind them, but within them, waiting patiently for the moment when they say, "Yes, I am still here, I still desire, I still deserve to feel joy in my own skin." And as we arrive gently at the heart of this intimate journey into the often unspoken desires of older women, what becomes most striking is not how these fantasies differ from those of younger years, but how much deeper they run, how rooted they are in emotional nuance, lived experience, and the quiet craving for authentic connection that isn't filtered through societal scripts or fleeting images of idealized beauty. Because the truth is, these fantasies, whether they whisper of being cherished, of being touched with reverence, of being emotionally held without having to explain or justify, are less about what happens and more about how it feels. And what older women are secretly dreaming of isn't a return to youth, but a return to self, to that untouched part of themselves that was never fully seen, never fully allowed to unfold. And in the privacy of their thoughts, in the silence of night or the solitude of morning rituals, they often imagine moments where everything slows down, where someone gazes into their eyes and doesn't look away, where intimacy isn't about performance or friction, but about feeling profoundly present in another's arms. And this desire, this longing to be felt, to be understood, to be wanted not just in spite of age, but because of it, is not something that fades with time. It sharpens, it distills, it becomes clearer. And for many women over 60, these fantasies represent a reclamation of all that was postponed, all that was sacrificed in the name of duty, motherhood, marriage, or survival. And now, in this chapter, there's a yearning to finally receive, to be adored for the woman she has become, for the resilience she wears like a crown, for the wisdom that softens her every gesture and even the smallest imagined act. A partner brushing her hair slowly, someone kissing the back of her hands as if to thank them for decades of nurturing. Someone making love to her not in a hurry, not as routine, but as a prayer with pauses and tears and laughter. All of it speaks to a truth that too many overlook, that older women do not become less sensual, less desirable, less worthy of passion, but more, so much more, because they've earned the right to stop pretending, to ask for what they need, to feel without fear. And what's more powerful than that is the fact that many women carry these fantasies not with bitterness or regret, but with quiet strength, with the belief that even if the world refuses to validate their desire, they still hold the pen to write their own story. And whether these moments remain in the realm of imagination or manifest in real-life intimacy with someone open-hearted enough to meet them fully, the very act of fantasizing is itself a reclaiming, a reminder that longing is not weakness, that desire is not the domain of the young, and that the heart, the skin, the soul of a woman past 60 can still pulse with fire, with curiosity, with dreams that stretch into the stars. And these fantasies aren't limited by convention or even possibility, because in them, she becomes fully herself, unhindered by the role she had to play, by the silence she had to keep, by the softness she had to hide. And instead, she becomes the version of herself that feels truest, the one who still blushes at a compliment, still sighs when held just right, still trembles when spoken to with reverence. And even the fantasy of holding hands in public, of being kissed on the forehead before sleep, of receiving a letter, written slowly with words meant only for her. These quiet longings are not trivial. They are sacred. They're the final blooming of a flower that never stopped reaching for light. And perhaps what older women fantasize about most is not simply sex, not even romance in its traditional form, but emotional intimacy wrapped in physical tenderness, the kind that says, "You are not invisible. I see you, I choose you, and I desire you." And in that, there is healing, because so many wounds go unspoken, moments of rejection, of dismissal, of comparison. And in these inner worlds, they are rewritten, replaced with presence, with touch that honors, with love that lingers, and with connection that deepens not in spite of aging, but because of it. And so we must ask ourselves, what would happen if we allowed these fantasies to be voiced, not as secrets, not as shameful confessions, but as truths that deserve space, as expressions of the ongoing beauty of a woman who refuses to go quietly into the background of her own life. Because every longing she carries is a testament to the fact that she is still here, still vibrant, still full of passion and purpose. And as this conversation comes to a close, let it not be the end, but a beginning, a spark that encourages every woman watching to honor her desires, to share her stories, to embrace her sensual self with pride, and to know that whatever she dreams of, whatever she fantasizes about in the quiet corners of her heart, is not only valid, it is vital, because the world needs to remember that older women do not stop dreaming, loving, or yearning. They only grow more fearless in how they do it.